January 15, 1971. Harlem. 3:47 a.m. The man walks into the basement carrying a manila envelope. His hands shake. Blood drips from a gash above his left eye. He sets the envelope on the table where Frank Lucas sits counting money in stacks of 10,000. Inside that envelope are 9 photographs, 9 faces, 9 names. 9 men who were supposed to kill Frank Lucas that week. 8 of them are crossed out in red ink. Frank Lucas doesn't look up from his money. $847,000 sits on the table in front of him, one day's earnings from the purest heroin pipeline in American history. He counts with the precision of a bank teller, the focus of a surgeon. When he finally speaks, his voice is quieter than a whisper. "Show me." The survivor, we'll call him the messenger, slides the envelope across the table. Frank opens it slowly. 8 photographs marked with red X's. 8 professional killers flown in from Sicily, each paid $50,000 to end the life of the man who had done the impossible, bypass the Italian mafia entirely, and build an empire they couldn't touch. The 9th photograph has no mark. It shows the messenger himself, younger, confident, holding a gun. That man is gone now. What sits across from Frank Lucas is something else. A convert. "They told us you were just a dealer," the messenger whispers. "They said you got lucky. They said you were loud." Frank Lucas finally looks up. His eyes are cold mathematics. "The loud man dies," Frank says. "The silent man builds kingdoms." This is not a story about drugs. This is not a story about money. This is a story about what happens when you build an empire so quietly, so efficiently, so ruthlessly, that by the time your enemies realize you exist, you've already won the war. Frank Lucas didn't just sell heroin. He sold invisibility. He sold discipline. He sold a lesson written in blood and silence. But here's what the mafia didn't understand when they sent 9 killers to Harlem. Frank Lucas wasn't just another street dealer who got lucky. He was a student. A student of Bumpy Johnson, the man who taught him the only rule that matters in the underworld. So when the 5 families decided to eliminate him, they weren't just trying to kill a drug dealer. They were trying to kill an idea. The idea that you didn't need their permission. The idea that a black man from North Carolina could become untouchable. They sent 9 men to prove they were wrong. 8 died trying. And the 9th? He became the messenger of a new truth. Wells Restaurant, Harlem, July 1968. The air hangs thick with grease and cigarette smoke, but underneath it all is something else. Death. It sits at the corner table like an uninvited guest, patient and certain. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson raises a coffee cup with hands that once strangled grown men, but now shake like autumn leaves. The King of Harlem is dying, and everyone in the room can smell it. Frank Lucas stands 3 feet away, close enough to catch bullets, far enough to move when they come. For 15 years, he's been Bumpy's shadow, his driver, his most trusted student. But tonight feels different. Tonight feels like graduation. Bumpy doesn't look at Frank when he speaks. His eyes track the window where 125th Street bleeds neon into the darkness. "You see that peacock over there?" Bumpy nods toward a table where Nicky Barnes holds court, diamond tooth flashing, fur collar catching the light. "Look at him." Custom suit, loud laugh, throwing money like confetti. He thinks that's power. Frank follows his gaze. Barnes is everything that draws immediate respect. Flash, fear, visibility, the easy path to the throne. The loud man dies, Bumpy whispers, voice like sandpaper. The silent man builds kingdoms. He coughs into a white handkerchief. When he pulls it away, there's red in the fabric. The clock inside his chest is running down, and everyone can hear it ticking. "Frank, who controls Harlem?" "You do." Bumpy's eyes snap up, sharp as broken glass. "Wrong. That's the fairy tale. Who really controls Harlem? Frank recalculates. The Italians. Why? Because they control the supply. Bumpy nods, satisfied. This is the lesson. This is the inheritance. The Italians don't own us because they're stronger. They own us because we're customers. Every black dealer in America is just renting their empire from Italian landlords. They set the prices. They determine the purity. They decide who eats and who starves. He leans forward, voice dropping to a growl. But there's a war happening, Frank. Vietnam. And wars create opportunities for men smart enough to see them. You know what grows in those fields? Thailand? Laos? Burma? That golden triangle? Opium. Not just opium. Purity. The real product. 99% pure, while the Italians feed us stepped on garbage and call it a favor. Bumpy grips Frank's wrist, harder than a dying man should be able to. Cut out the supplier, you cut out the master. You understand that, you stop being a customer. You become a king. The restaurant spins. Bumpy's hand slides away, his eyes widen like he's seeing something behind Frank's shoulder. Something only dying men see. The coffee cup tips. Black liquid mixing with red on white cloth. Frank catches him as he falls, holding 30 years of Harlem wisdom in his arms as life fades from the old man's eyes. No shootout, no grand speech, just the brutal mathematics of mortality. The funeral 3 days later looks like a mafia convention. The 5 families send flowers and condolences, but Frank sees the truth in their eyes. They're not mourning, they're calculating. With Bumpy gone, Harlem becomes open territory. A capo named Dominic Catano approaches Frank outside the church. Expensive suit, gold rings, the casual arrogance of a man who's never been told no. "The king is dead, driver," Catano says, lighting a cigarette. "Your ride is over. Find a new job." Frank could argue, could threaten, could demand the respect Bumpy commanded. Instead, he does the most dangerous thing possible. He stays silent, he nods, he walks away. Catano watches him go and smiles. Problem solved. But Frank isn't walking away defeated. He's walking away liberated. The Italians think they've dismissed a servant. They've actually freed a student who just inherited the most dangerous education in the criminal underworld. 2 weeks later, Frank walks into a midtown travel agency with $50,000 in cash and books a one-way ticket to Bangkok. The agent asks if he's military. Frank says no. Business? Frank says yes. The agent doesn't ask what kind of business. Nobody ever does. Frank leaves carrying a ticket to a war zone and a plan that will either make him untouchable or get him killed in a jungle on the other side of the world. He's going to do what no black dealer has ever attempted. He's going to become his own supply chain. The driver is dead. The emperor is about to be born. Bangkok, September 1969. The heat hits Frank Lucas like a physical assault, thick and wet, carrying the smell of diesel fumes, rotting fruit, and something else. Death. It hangs in the air around the military airfield where transport planes disgorge soldiers with hollow eyes and load others in aluminum boxes draped with American flags. This is war country. This is where fortunes are made and men disappear without trace. Frank steps off the transport in a cheap suit that's already soaked through, carrying a single bag and $50,000 in cash. He doesn't speak Thai or Vietnamese, but he speaks something more universal. He speaks mathematics. Pure, ruthless, profitable mathematics. The Golden Triangle waits 200 miles north, where Thailand bleeds into Laos and Burma, where warlords control poppy fields that stretch beyond the horizon. For decades, the Italian mafia has bought their heroin through a chain of middlemen. French Corsicans. Turkish smugglers. A dozen hands touching the product, each one taking a cut, each one diluting the purity. By the time a kilogram reaches Harlem, It's been stepped on so many times, it's barely recognizable as the same substance. Frank Lucas looks at this system and sees what nobody else sees. Inefficiency. Waste. Opportunity. The journey to the source takes 3 days through jungle roads that turn to mud when it rains. Frank travels with his cousin Leslie, now Sergeant Leslie Atkinson, who arranged the meeting through contacts that exist in the gray spaces between military duty and survival. Armed guards check them at 3 different checkpoints before they reach the compound, a collection of teak buildings surrounded by men with AK-47s who measure visitors in seconds of life remaining. At the center sits Lueci, 70 years old, with gold teeth and eyes like black diamonds. He commands an army that protects opium processing labs worth more than most countries' GDP. His desk is made from ammunition crates. His translator is nervous. Americans don't come here to negotiate. They come to buy small amounts through established channels, or they don't come at all. Frank doesn't flinch under Lueci's stare. He opens a briefcase, not full of money, but full of numbers. Ledgers. Calculations. The mathematics of revolution. The Italians pay you $4,000 per kilogram, Frank says, speaking slowly so the translator can keep up. They buy small amounts. They negotiate like beggars. They treat you like a supplier, not a partner. Lueci's expression doesn't change, but his fingers tap once on the ammunition crate. Continue. I'll pay you $12,000 per kilogram. But I want 100 kilograms at a time. Pure. No cutting. No middlemen. Direct delivery to my people in Saigon. The room goes silent except for the jungle sounds outside. 100 kilograms is more heroin than most operations move in a year. Frank is proposing it as a starting order. The translator hesitates before speaking. Even he understands the audacity of what's being proposed. Lueci studies Frank for 30 seconds that feel like 30 years. This isn't just a drug deal. This is a proposal to bypass the entire established system. To cut out not just the Italian mafia, but the French connections, the Turkish roots, the Corsican networks, to make everyone else irrelevant. Finally, Lueci smiles, showing those gold teeth. You are either very smart or very dead, he says in careful English. We will see which. The handshake that follows seals more than a business arrangement. It seals a revolution. For the first time in American drug history, a black dealer has eliminated the Italian supply chain entirely. Frank isn't renting someone else's empire anymore. He's building his own from the ground up. But having the product means nothing without moving it. The Golden Triangle to New York is 10,000 miles of borders, inspections, customs agents, and law enforcement. Every traditional smuggling route is watched, compromised, or controlled by competitors. Frank needs something that's not just invisible. He needs something that's sacred. He finds it in death itself. Back in Saigon, Frank and Leslie sit in a military bar, staring at a folded American flag on the table between them. Outside, another transport plane lands with more aluminum boxes. The war is producing a steady stream of fallen heroes, each one returning home with absolute, unquestionable dignity. They don't search the coffins, Leslie says quietly, his voice barely audible over the bar noise. Military protocol. You never, ever open a fallen soldier's casket. It's sacred. It's untouchable. Frank sees the equation immediately. On one side, the most secure smuggling route in history. On the other, a moral line that once crossed can never be uncrossed. He stares at the flag, thinking of Bumpy Johnson's last lesson. Cut out the middleman. Become the source. We build false bottoms, Frank says finally. Waterproof compartments. 50 kilograms at a time, sealed tight. No leaks, no dogs, no searches. Leslie looks sick, but he nods. War has taught him that the system doesn't care about them. The system doesn't care about the dead. Why should they care about the system? The first shipment arrives at a military airfield in New Jersey in March 1970. 100 kilograms of 99% pure heroin steps onto American soil draped in patriotism, invisible to every lawman on the ground. Frank cuts it himself in a warehouse in the Bronx, diluting it just enough to prevent instant overdoses, but keeping it exponentially stronger than anything on the streets. He calls it blue magic. The impact is immediate and devastating. While the mafia sells 15% purity heroin for $200 per bag, Frank sells 90% purity for $150. Better product. Lower price. The mathematics of loyalty. Within 2 weeks, every addict in Harlem has switched. Within a month, dealers are begging Frank for supply. Lines form around the block at 116th Street. Frank's crew operates with military discipline. No talking, no flash. Hand over the money, take the blue bag, keep moving. The cash comes in so fast, they stop counting it. They weigh it. Frank Lucas is making $1 million per day while remaining completely invisible to everyone who matters. Back in Little Italy, the numbers tell a story of catastrophe. Dominic Catano, the same capo who dismissed Frank as just a driver 18 months earlier, sits in a social club on Mulberry Street reviewing ledgers that don't make sense. His Harlem operation used to generate $200,000 weekly. Now it's down to $60,000 and dropping. Who's the supplier? Catano demands, his voice tight with controlled rage. His lieutenant shakes his head. Nobody knows, Don Dominic. We've squeezed every dealer we can find. They all say the same thing. They don't know who runs it. They just know it's better than ours. Catano stares at the numbers like they're written in a foreign language. Someone has built an empire in his territory, stolen his customers, destroyed his profits, and he doesn't even know their name. That's not just competition. That's humiliation. 3,000 miles away, Frank Lucas sits in a modest apartment in Teaneck, New Jersey, counting money in stacks of $10,000. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't boast. He simply counts, records, and plans the next shipment from his invisible kingdom. The silent man has cut out the middleman. Now he is the source. And the loud men still don't even know his name. Harlem, 1970. The streets know blue magic, but they don't know Frank Lucas. That's not accident. That's architecture. Every corner, every addict, every dealer can tell you about the blue stamp bags that hit harder and cost less. But ask them who built the throne? They shrug. They don't know. They never knew. That's power. Not the drugs, not the money, the invisibility. Frank Lucas is making $1 million per day while remaining completely unknown to authorities. His monthly profits exceed $30 million. His operation generates more revenue than legitimate Fortune 500 companies, and he drives a beat-up Chevrolet with a dented fender. While Nicky Barnes poses for New York Magazine covers in leather jackets and gold chains, calling himself Mr. Untouchable, Frank Lucas wears off the rack suits from Sears. While Barnes throws parties at Studio 54 with celebrities and models, Frank eats dinner at home and watches television. The binary opposition is absolute. Visibility versus invisibility. Ego versus survival. Death versus discipline. The loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room. Bumpy's voice lives in Frank's head like scripture, and he follows it with religious devotion. Frank's organizational genius isn't just revolutionary, it's invisible. He doesn't recruit hungry Harlem tough guys who talk too much and die too young. He flies back to North Carolina, back to the red clay and tobacco fields, and walks into small wooden houses where his brothers and cousins still count nickels like dollars. He brings them north one by one. The country boys, men who understand hard work and silence, men whose loyalty isn't bought with money but born in blood. His youngest brother handles distribution, his cousin manages the cutting operation, his nephew oversees street sales. They're paid extraordinarily well sometimes, $50,000 weekly, but they follow one non-negotiable rule. Silence. No bragging, no flash, no mistakes. Frank sets them up in modest apartments, gives them used cars, and watches them move millions while looking like factory workers. The discipline is so complete that even addicts buying blue magic don't know who supplies it. But invisibility comes with a cost that eats at souls. Frank's wife Julie sits across from him in their modest Teaneck home, watching him count stacks of hundreds that cover the dining room table. Behind them, their children sleep in bedrooms with Sears furniture. Outside, neighbors drive nicer cars. "Why are we living like this?" Julie asks. "You're making more money than God, and we're living like we're on welfare." Frank doesn't look up from counting. The loud man dies, the silent man survives. You want to be a queen, you got to make it to old age first. But temptation spreads through his organization like fever. His brothers see Barnes buying Cadillacs while they drive Fords. They watch lesser dealers get respect through visibility while they remain ghosts. Discipline versus desire, the same war that destroyed every king before him. Meanwhile, in Little Italy, the mafia hemorrhages money and patience. Dominic Catano sits in a back room at Rouse with captains from all 5 families. The numbers tell a story of catastrophic collapse. Harlem used to generate $12 million annually. Now it generates $3 million and dropping fast. It takes 3 months of interrogations and beatings before they get a name. Frank Lucas, the driver. The man Catano dismissed outside Bumpy's funeral. The man he told to find a new job. That ghost has built an empire destroying their most profitable territory so quietly they didn't notice until too late. They investigate expecting the usual patterns. Nightclubs, expensive restaurants, flashy cars. They find none of it. Frank Lucas lives like a postal worker, drives like a retiree, dresses like a substitute teacher. He's a millionaire masquerading as nobody, and that makes him more dangerous than any gangster they've faced. He's a ghost, Catano tells the assembled captains. No criminal record, no visible wealth, no apparent weaknesses. So what do? Catano's answer is simple and final. We eliminate the problem. The contract goes out through channels existing since the 1920s. 450,000ers total. 9 professionals. Sicilian specialists. Kill Frank Lucas. Make it public. Send a message. The 9 arrive over a week, traveling separately, staying in different hotels. They don't know each other. They don't need to. They just need to converge on the target and execute. Frank doesn't know they're coming. He's too busy managing an empire spanning 3 continents. Then, 48 hours before the hit, his phone rings. The voice belongs to someone who decides Frank's survival is worth more than Italian loyalty. 9 men. 2 days. They're coming. Frank hangs up and stares at the wall where $2 million hides behind cheap paneling. For 2 years, he followed Bumpy's rule. Stay silent. Stay invisible. Stay alive. Now he has 48 hours to break every rule and transform from invisible emperor to visible warrior. The silent man has been found. Now he must prove silence was never weakness. It was preparation for war. Harlem, January 1971, 48 hours after the warning call. Frank Lucas sits at his kitchen table, pours a glass of water, and calculates. 9 professionals, $450,000 contract, 1 target. The mathematics are simple. Don't run from death. Control it. Most men panic when killers come hunting. Panic is noise. Panic is loud. Frank has built an empire on silence, and he intends to defend it the same way. He understands one fundamental truth about professional assassins: they are creatures of habit. They rely on intelligence. They study patterns. They exploit weaknesses. So Frank decides to give them exactly what they expect to find: a weakness, a pattern, an opportunity that's too perfect to resist. He calls his brothers into the basement of the Bronx warehouse, the country boys, men who share his blood and his discipline. No phones, no radios, just family and the kind of trust that can't be bought or broken. 9 men are coming to kill me, Frank says, voice flat as concrete. We're going to let them try. His youngest brother Turner looks confused. Let them? We're going to give them exactly what they want: a target. A clean shot. A mistake. Frank spreads word through specific channels. Information designed to leak like blood in water. Friday night. The counting house on 145th Street. Big shipment money. Just Frank and 2 guards. The intelligence reaches Italian ears within 6 hours, traveling through the same networks that once carried Bumpy Johnson's secrets. The 9 receive confirmation separately through their handlers. Target location verified. Minimal security. High-value elimination. They don't communicate with each other. They don't need to. They just need to converge and execute. What they don't understand is that Frank Lucas has spent 48 hours transforming that entire block into a killing ground disguised as an opportunity. January 15th, 1971. 11:30 p.m. The counting house sits dark except for one second-floor window where light bleeds through cheap curtains. Inside, Frank sits at a folding table with $847,000 in stacks, counting with the precision of a bank teller. 2 guards stand nearby, armed but relaxed. The door downstairs remains unlocked. Perfect bait. The 9 approach through 3 vectors with professional coordination. 3 from the north alley, 3 from the south loading entrance, 3 waiting in cars as extraction teams. They move with the confidence of men who've done this across 3 continents. Weapons silenced, communications minimal. They expect a chaotic street fight. They expect panicked amateurs. They walk into a chess match where Frank has already calculated checkmate. His brothers aren't inside the building. They're positioned on rooftops across the street, in parked delivery trucks with clear sight lines, in adjacent buildings with overlapping fields of fire. The entire block has become a crossfire zone, and the 9 professionals are walking into the center without knowing it. 11:47 p.m. The first team enters through the loading dock. Tactical movement. Professional discipline. They clear the ground floor and start toward the stairs where light spills from above. They never reach the second floor. Turner and his cousin open fire from concealed positions, turning the narrow stairwell into a slaughter chute. 3 bodies drop in 8 seconds. No screaming, no panic, just the brutal mathematics of superior positioning. The gunfire triggers immediate chaos. The second team at the north entrance realizes the trap instantly, but knowledge comes too late. Frank's youngest brother emerges from a parked van, cutting off their retreat with automatic fire. The engagement is brutal and brief. Combat at close range doesn't leave room for second chances. The third team in the cars tries to extract, engines roaring to life. But Frank's cousin, Leslie, the Vietnam veteran who helped build the Golden Triangle pipeline, has positioned a delivery truck to block their escape route. The drivers find themselves trapped in a kill zone with nowhere to run. 8 professional killers die in less than 4 minutes. Men who survived Sicily, survived Marseille, survived a dozen other contracts, eliminated like amateurs by a drug dealer they were told was lucky. But one man survives because he's smarter than his colleagues. The passenger in the lead car, a 30-year veteran named Marco, who ducks at the first muzzle flash instead of returning fire. When bullets chew through the windshield, he kicks the door open and runs, not toward the target but away from the kill zone. He makes it 2 blocks before Frank's brother catches him, gun pressed against his spine. "Walk," the voice says. "Don't run, don't talk, just walk." They bring Marco back to the counting house where Frank still sits at the table, money in neat stacks, as if 8 men hadn't just died in his name. The bodies are being loaded into a refrigerated truck. The 847,000 remains untouched. Frank doesn't look up when they push Marco into the chair across from him. "You're alive because you recognized what was happening," Frank says calmly, still counting bills. "Your friends died because they believed what they were told. They thought I was a dealer who got lucky." Marco says nothing. 20 years of contract work have taught him that silence increases survival odds. Frank finally looks up, eyes cold as winter mathematics. "I'm going to give you a choice," he says softly. "Die here as a killer or live as a messenger." The word hangs in the air like smoke. Messenger. A rat to the rats. A man who goes back not to boast about survival, but to confess the magnitude of their miscalculation. Frank slides a manila envelope across the table. Inside are 9 photographs. 8 marked with red X's. The 9th shows Marco himself, younger, holding a weapon in some forgotten war. "You're going to take this back to Catano," Frank says. "You're going to tell him exactly what happened here. You're going to explain that Frank Lucas didn't just survive his contract. He owned it." Marco stares at the photographs, understanding crystallizing like ice in his chest. This isn't mercy. This is psychological warfare. Frank is sending a message more powerful than any body count. He's sending proof that the mafia's best couldn't touch him. "Why let me live?" Frank resumes counting money, voice dropping to a whisper that carries more threat than any scream. "Because dead men can't deliver messages. And I want Catano to know exactly who he's dealing with before he makes his next mistake." Marco takes the envelope with shaking hands. They let him walk out of Harlem carrying proof of the impossible. A black dealer from North Carolina had just eliminated 9 Sicilian professionals and sent the survivor home with photographs of their failure. By dawn, Marco is on a plane back to New York's Little Italy. By noon, the envelope sits on Dominic Catano's desk at the Social Club on Mulberry Street. Catano opens it slowly, studying each photograph. 8 red X's. Professional killers eliminated like children. The 9th photograph unmarked, accompanied by a handwritten note in Marco's shaking script. He knew we were coming. He prepared the battlefield. This isn't a dealer. This is a general. Catano crumples the note, but he can't crumple the truth it contains. Frank Lucas has done the impossible. He's made the mafia look weak in their own territory, and weakness in their world is terminal. Instead of backing down, Catano makes a decision that will change the war entirely. He picks up the phone and dials a number he's never used before, a direct line to a corrupt lieutenant in the New York Police Department. "I have information," Catano says carefully, "about the biggest heroin operation in New York history. And if you help us destroy it, we'll give you the arrest that makes your career. The war has escalated beyond the underworld." Frank Lucas survived the killers. Now he faces something more dangerous than any assassin. He faces the system itself, armed with badges and warrants and the full power of the law. The silent man has won the battle. But the real war is just beginning. Madison Square Garden, March 8, 1971. The fight of the century, Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. 20,000 people packed into seats that cost more than most Americans earn in a year. The air vibrates with celebrity electricity. Sinatra sits 3 rows back. The Kennedy clan holds court in their private box. Politicians, movie stars, and mob bosses fight for attention in the golden glow of ringside. But in the very front row, eclipsing them all, sits a man nobody knows wearing a coat worth $50,000. Frank Lucas has spent 5 years building an empire on silence. He survived the mafia's wrath, eliminated 9 professional killers, and moved hundreds of millions of dollars without leaving a fingerprint. He followed Bumpy Johnson's sacred rule with religious devotion: the loud man dies. The silent man builds kingdoms. Tonight, for the first and last time in his criminal career, Frank Lucas decides to be seen. The chinchilla coat is floor-length, custom-made, lined with mink. It catches every camera flash like a beacon, announcing wealth before Frank opens his mouth. His wife Julie sits beside him, draped in equal luxury, both of them glowing under the arena lights like royalty at a coronation. Hours earlier, in their modest Teaneck bedroom, Julie held the coat like a sacred object. "You can't wear that," Frank said, but his protest was soft, half-hearted. "You said you wanted respect," she answered, draping it across his shoulders. "Kings don't hide, Frank, not on nights like this." The fur settled across his back like a crown. For a moment, the hungry kid from North Carolina disappeared. In the mirror stood something else entirely. A man who survived 9 hitmen. A man who took on the mafia and won. The invisible emperor stepping into the light. He walks into Madison Square Garden like he owns the building, and for the first time in his life, people notice. Cameras flash. Heads turn. Even the fighters glance his way during their entrances. The message is unmistakable: somebody, not nobody. 12 rows back, Detective Richie Roberts watches through cheap binoculars, working security detail to pay his ex-wife's alimony. Roberts is the rarest creature in 1971 law enforcement, an honest cop in the NIPD's narcotics division. The kind of man who turned in $1 million in unmarked bills when his corrupt partners expected him to split it. That honesty has made him an outcast in his own department, but it's also made him dangerous to men who operate in shadows. Roberts scans the crowd out of habit, cop instincts never sleeping. Then his binoculars freeze on Frank Lucas in that impossible coat. The mathematics are immediate and brutal. Black man. Harlem connections. Front row seats worth thousands. Wearing a coat that costs more than Roberts earns in 5 years. Drugs. Has to be drugs. Roberts snaps a photograph with a camera he carries for exactly these moments. One click of a shutter. That sound is the beginning of the end for the most successful drug empire in American history. Within 48 hours, Roberts has Frank's photograph circulating through every informant network in New York. Within a week, he has a name to match the face that's been haunting his investigation. Frank Lucas. Former driver for Bumpy Johnson. No criminal record. No visible means of support. Living modestly in Teaneck, New Jersey, and controlling a heroin operation that generates over $1 million daily. But having a name isn't enough. Roberts needs evidence, and Frank has been too careful for too long. The investigation becomes an obsession spanning 4 years. Roberts builds a task force of the few honest cops remaining in narcotics. They surveil Frank's modest home, photograph his used car, document his invisible lifestyle. Everything points to a man living far below his means. Then they find the anomaly that breaks the case wide open. By 1974, Frank's psychological unraveling accelerates like cancer. Success has bred paranoia so complete it consumes his days and haunts his nights. The money accumulates faster than he can launder it. $584,683 in cash hides behind false walls in his Teaneck basement, representing just days of earnings from an empire that has generated over $250 million in 5 years. His brothers want more visibility, more flash, more of the respect they see other dealers commanding. Julie questions the constant secrecy, remembering the night at Madison Square Garden when they felt like royalty. The empire has grown beyond Frank's ability to remain invisible. You can't move millions daily and stay a ghost forever. Frank paces his modest home at 3 a.m., counting money that rots in basement safes and stuffs attic insulation. He has achieved everything he ever wanted, but he can feel the walls closing in. Every car behind him could be surveillance. Every phone call could be tapped. Every loyal soldier could be the one who breaks under pressure. The binary opposition has shifted from Frank versus the mafia to Frank versus the inevitable mathematics of exposure. January 28, 1975, 6:00 a.m. The inevitable arrives with overwhelming force. Federal agents Night D, and New Jersey State Police converge on Frank's quiet suburban home with military precision. Battering rams splinter the front door. Shotguns sweep through rooms where his children sleep. Julie screams as they flood through every entrance simultaneously. A coordinated assault that leaves no escape route, no time to destroy evidence. Frank doesn't run, doesn't fight. He simply raises his hands as they flood through his door, watching his empire collapse in real time. They tear the house apart with surgical efficiency, finding exactly what Roberts suspected they would find. $584,683 in cash stuffed into laundry bags and hidden behind false walls. Ledgers documenting the Golden Triangle pipeline. Records of an empire that bypassed every established drug route and made the Italian mafia irrelevant in their own territory. Evidence of the most sophisticated heroin operation in American history, built and controlled by a man who drove a used Chevrolet. But the real battle doesn't happen in the courtroom. It happens in a small, windowless interrogation room at the federal building in Newark, where Frank faces his final impossible choice. Richie Roberts sits across from Frank, a stack of evidence between them thick enough to bury Frank for 70 years. No parole, no appeals, just decades dying in a federal cage while his family forgets his face. "You're 43 years old," Roberts says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 70 years means you die in prison. Your children grow up without you. Your wife moves on. Your empire becomes a footnote in someone else's story. Frank stares at the metal table, seeing the binary opposition of his final choice laid out in stark mathematics. Loyalty versus survival, the code versus his life, die as a legend or live as a rat. Or, Roberts continues, leaning forward slightly, you cooperate. You give us names. You testify. And maybe, just maybe, you see freedom again before you're too old to remember why it matters. The silence stretches like razor wire. Frank thinks about Bumpy Johnson's lessons, about the 9 hitmen he defeated, about the mafia that tried to eliminate him, about the corrupt cops who enabled a system that destroyed communities while taking bribes to look the other way. Loyalty to what? To men who tried to murder him? To a system built on exploitation and violence? Frank Lucas looks up at Richie Roberts with eyes that have watched kingdoms rise and fall, and makes the choice that will define his legacy more than any empire ever could. "I'll talk," he says slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. But not just about dealers, about everyone, the whole rotten system. His testimony becomes nuclear. Frank doesn't just give up street dealers and suppliers, he exposes the massive corruption in the NIPD's Special Investigations Unit, the elite cops who were supposed to be hunting him but were actually taxing his operation. 52 out of 70 officers in the unit are indicted based on his testimony. Careers destroyed, families ruined. The entire narcotics division exposed as a criminal enterprise that made Frank's operation look honest by comparison. He burns the dealers who worked for him. He burns the mafia captains who tried to kill him. He burns the corrupt cops who took his money and enabled his empire. Frank Lucas doesn't just cooperate with the system. He demolishes the entire infrastructure that made his success possible. The cooperation earns him a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of 70. But it costs him something more valuable than time. It costs him his legend. Frank Lucas walks out of federal prison at age 58, carrying a cardboard box containing everything he owns. The world has changed during his incarceration. Hip-hop has replaced soul music. Crack has replaced heroin. The empire he built through silence and discipline is ancient history, remembered only in DEA training manuals and crime documentaries. But his reputation survives, transformed into something worse than any prison sentence: rat. The word follows him like a shadow through the streets of Harlem. He walks down 116th Street, where he once made $1 million daily, and nobody crosses the street in fear. Nobody looks away in respect. The young dealers on the corners don't see a king returning to his throne. They see an old man with a bad back and a name that means betrayal. They see a cautionary tale about what happens when you choose survival over loyalty. Frank Lucas built the most successful black criminal empire in American history by following one sacred rule: stay invisible. He lost it all by breaking that rule once, for one night, because he wanted to be seen as the king he had become. The silent man lived. But the legend died the moment he put on that chinchilla coat and stepped into the light at Madison Square Garden. Standing on the corner where his empire once generated millions, Frank faces the final brutal mathematics of his choices. He survived the Hitmen, he survived the jungle, he survived the mafia, he survived federal prison. But he could not survive his own vanity, his own human need for recognition and respect. In the end, Frank Lucas proved Bumpy Johnson's final lesson with his own life. The loud man dies, even when he's still breathing, even when he walks free. The moment you choose visibility over invisibility, the moment you prioritize being seen over staying hidden, the empire dies even if the emperor survives. So the question lands on you now, carried forward from the ruins of Frank's legend to your own choices about power, ambition, and the price of being remembered. If you could build an empire worth hundreds of millions through absolute discipline and silence, only to lose your throne the moment you asked for respect, would you make the same choice Frank made? Would you wear the coat? Would you step into the light? Was survival worth the cost of his crown? Was living as a rat better than dying as a king? The answer lives in the space between legend and life, between the throne and the grave, in the eternal war between what we want to be and what we're willing to sacrifice to stay alive.